you mix this stuff in the soil, you're totally wasting your time. It locks up to where the plants can't get to it. But if you put a big handful of it in the bottom of the hole, plant your plant on top of it, then you will get a big increase in fruit production. Now, tomatoes grow best if they are supported. And some people will put stakes in. I think the very best way to grow a tomato is in a cage. Best tomato cages I have ever found, most expensive tomato cages I've ever found. For about 5 years, I bought 6 of them a year, and now I've got about 30 or maybe it's 36 of these things in my garden. And the great thing about these things is they fold up and hang them on the fence when they're not in use. If there's a year that I don't plant as many tomatoes, I'll grow cucumbers up these things, I'll grow snow peas up these things in the cool months. But tomato cages are a great way to grow your tomatoes. Now if you go down to the places that masquerade as nurseries, the box stores that I call them unscrupulous merchandisers of plants, they really aren't nurseries, they sell you these little jokes of a tomato cage that's about this tall. Before the Texas Tomato Cage Company started making these things, I would just buy fence wire, 6-foot fence wire, and bend it into a circle, stick a piece of rebar down the side, and you use that for a tomato cage about this diameter or sometimes slightly smaller. And everybody would say, why'd you use such a big cage? And I'd say, because the tomatoes are going to grow right out of the top of it. And then say, no way. And I'd say, want to bet? Standard bet was a bottle of wine, and I never lost a bet. You can even get extensions for the top of these things if you want to make them taller. Plant some Juliets, plant some indeterminate tomatoes, plant them and grow them right, and I'll be amazed if you don't have them coming out of the top of the cage by halfway through the growing season. Again, I'll tell you they're expensive. I'm going to tell you they're not, because they are, but they are really long-lasting and good quality. And I guess I'll leave that there for a second. And you just use them over and over and over. When I plant tomatoes, one thing that I do, because I don't know, I always want to plant a lot of varieties, and I have an occasional problem with cutworms in my garden, and that's a pretty big around cage. I will always, a lot of these little heirloom tomatoes come, you'll find you put 2 plants in the pot, and I'll put 2 plants like that. If I'm planting them from the 6-packs, I'll plant 2 plants together in each cage. That way if I lose one of them or something happens, I've still got a tomato plant growing in there. And I don't think it crowds them too much to put two plants together like this. But space your cages out. Don't let your cages touch. My tomato plants will typically be about this wide midway through the growing season. And everybody plants them too close together the first year. Don't be embarrassed when you say, oh, that's too far apart, and you cram them in a little bit closer. But when they're so intertwined that you can hardly get in there to get the fruit off of them, remember that I told you this was going to happen. But tomato cages are great ways to grow your tomatoes. Now, if you want to jump the gun on planting and plant early, or if we have a late unexpected freeze, or if we have, like this year, very windy conditions, one thing that I do when I plant, you probably hear me talk a lot about insulate fabric. We use this as something to protect plants from freezing weather in the winter months. I've taken a bunch of these things and cut them in strips about this wide. And every year when I plant my tomatoes, and I'm going to push this down about 6 inches into the ground, but I will wrap up to about this ring, which is normally about this high. I will wrap a piece of insulate around the tomato cage up to that height. That protects it from these terrible winds that we've had for the past several weeks and will probably continue to have. It protects it to some extent from creatures that want to get in and eat it, like bushy-tailed tree rats, which some of y'all may call squirrels, and various other things. But I like to wrap the lower part of my tomato cage with insulate, and it just really seems to help things get off to a good start. Now, there is a disease out there, a virus disease that some people wind up in their tomato plants. It's called tomato spotted wilt virus, and you end up with kind of a distorted as far as color, and just a real gnarly, not very good growth on things. If that happens on a young tomato plant, you might as well throw it up, pull it up, throw it away. If it happens on a mature plant, don't worry. The top's not going to grow much more, but the bottom part will still go on and make some decent tomatoes. Tomato spotted wilt virus is spread by the thrips insect. And it's not a problem for very many people, but if you have a problem with the virus in your tomatoes, go ahead and wrap your tomato cages all the way to the top with Insulate. They sell the same thing under the name of Plant Shield. They sell it under the name of Grow Web. Is still another name. You don't have to worry about covering the top, but because thrips don't usually seem to get in and go down. But that's the one way to keep out the insects that cause the disease. But again, it's never been a problem in my garden, so I don't know, hopefully it won't be for you guys either. The one other thing that I do is I have little squares cut of the Insulate, and in my garden, after I plant, or as soon as I plant my tomatoes, I've got that ring of it around the bottom. I put a hood on it. I put a piece of the Insulate on the top and, you know, put it on with 4 clothespins. Anybody that's ever been through a hailstorm and seen your tomatoes turn to mush on the ground will understand why I did that. This year I'd almost, no, I don't want that. I want moisture in any form. But anyway, these cages are just a neat way. And like I say, good thing to ask for Christmas or Mother's Day or Easter or whatever else. Just gradually accumulate what you need. Yes, sir.
Moisture. How much do you water a tomato?
You can never water a tomato plant too much, but you can sure water it too often. When you water it, flood it, and then let it get dry between times. If you water your tomatoes too often, the fruit will crack. You'll have beautiful tomatoes with big splits in the sides. That's from watering too often. Typically, even in the hot summer months, once my tomatoes are growing well, I'll water once a week. But many people harm their tomato plants by watering too often. Yes?
And water the ground, not the actual leaves.
Much better to water the ground than the foliage, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Yes? You. You.
Me?
Yes?
Oh, I was fascinated by that tomato plant in Hawaii that was 2 miles long on the wall. Could you plant them on a fence?
Absolutely.
And they would do just fine?
They'll do just fine. You'll probably have to tie them up to get them started. But yeah. Yes, sir.
Can you find those cages?
I know a nursery on Sunset Road that carries them. Most better nurseries do carry them.
And second question, you using a system that has 1 gallon of liters, for example. You water it once a week, how many gallons?
I probably put 5 gallons a time on a plant. Lots of water. Again, you don't ever water too much, but you can sure water too often. Yes, sir.
Did you add fertilizers to water?
Not if I prepared the soil properly at first. Later in the season, I may add some Hastagrow or some fish emulsion or something like that. But I like putting the nutrient in the soil before I start because I usually don't take the time to mix as I go.
And is the 6 mil plastic good enough for insulation?
No. If you put out plastic, it's like putting out a parachute. Would you stand out with an open parachute on a windy day? You'll end up in Dallas in about 15 minutes. And plastic's the same way. It's just a big sail. You put plastic on your cages, they'll be flat on the ground after the next wind. This stuff is porous enough the wind will go through it. And I usually, when I put this out, I'll usually jam a piece of rebar down to the ground just to hold it, just in case. What's that?
The green barrier like for the patio.
If it lets wind through, it'd probably be okay. Yes, sir.
In the container garden, should I keep it on the dry side?
Yes. Water thoroughly. Water all the way through the pot, but keep it on the dry side. Just a couple more things about tomatoes and we'll go on. Yes, ma'am.
Do birds bother tomatoes?
Uh-huh. The Insulate helps with that, or you can get the fruit tree netting. It looks like kind of a hairnet with big openings. Drape that over them, and yeah. Birds and squirrels, bushy-tailed tree rats are a problem. I went out of my garden one day and there were 4 black-mounted rock squirrels hanging on a cage eating foliage and fruit. I started putting out my live traps. I was going to get those 4 little boogers. 47 squirrels later, I caught the last one. Yeah. Okay, one more and then we'll go on.
With this dry wind we've been having, is the same watering system once a week, thoroughly water once a week apply?
Yep.
With the young plants as well?
No, once they're established.
Okay.
Need
How
to
about
be
young
established.
plants?
Water them when the soil's dry, a couple of knuckles deep.
Okay.
Now, tomatoes may get a couple of insect and disease problems. The disease that I see most commonly is called early blight. And it's a fungus disease. It starts at the base of the plant and works its way up. And it's just yellow leaves. I mean, it's like a yellowing that starts at the base and just keeps going up. The things that I have found that help with that, and some varieties always seem to be more susceptible than others. When I plant, I'll sprinkle some whole ground cornmeal, not store-bought, but the whole ground stuff, that just ground up kernels of corn. Get it at a feed store or get it from us. You don't want grocery store cornmeal. They've taken and they've polished all the good stuff off the corn, put a little bit of it back and called it enriched. Just whole ground cornmeal. Sprinkle some of that on the ground. If you have fungus problems on just about anything, we're going to talk about mildew on squash and cucumbers in a few minutes.